My name is Dorothy Erickson, and I spent 11 years in Central Africa as a missionary. So the time came when my older two children were, one was married, one was in college. I thought, well, maybe I could do some missionary work. And that started the process of what I thought was going to be 1 year and ended up being 12 years. So I went to seminary and got some training, actually got a master's degree in intercultural studies. And the first time I went to Africa, I was 1 year in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. At that time, it was known as Zaire. When I went back, I went to a Central African Republic expecting to stay there until I retired. But the 5 years that we were there were 7 attempted coups, and the 7th one succeeded. So that even to this day, it's unsafe to go back to the area where we were. The first thing I did was to do language study. And there were times I felt my whole missionary career was spent learning languages. Because I didn't know French, which was the official language of those countries, the official language of Central African Republic, I learned a trade language called Sango, and that allowed me to speak with almost anyone in the country. And after that, I could start learning the tribal language. Whereas Sango was an easy language, Fulfulde was very complex. And so I spent about 2 years in language study right there, using local Fulani people to teach me their language. The villages of the Fulani in Central African Republic were very, we would say, crude, because they were semi-nomadic. Originally they'd been fully nomadic, but now they were sort of settled. But they changed their village location every couple of years. And during the dry season, the men would take the cows to areas where there was water. Water was the limiting factor more than grass. So their huts consisted of poles and branches kind of woven between the poles. Each woman had her own hut. The man had his own hut. Each of the married sons had a hut, and each of their wives had a hut. Every woman, when she marries, goes to the husband's village. If she divorces, and divorce is very common, she would go back to her parents' village. The unmarried younger men all had lived together in one hut. The unmarried girls stayed in the hut with their mother. And then there was another hut that was the cook hut. Like all the Africans, they kept it swept with brooms made of palm fronds so that there was no grass, because that makes it easier to see snakes coming. So none of the Africans wanted grass around their huts. Originally in Central African Republic, there were 6 of us on the team, and we were working with the Fulani tribe. This tribe was an unreached tribe in the area where we were. In other parts of West Africa, there were a few missionaries working with them. It's a large tribe of about 26 million found throughout West Africa. And so what we did, we wanted to learn about them and about their customs and their culture. So we just spent a lot of time visiting them in their compounds, getting to know them, getting them to trust us. Then after the coup in Central African Republic, when we relocated, we felt we were really ready to launch ministry. So the woman that was part of our team started going around to different compounds, telling Bible stories to the women. Starting with Genesis and working through the process of redemption from the beginning of time. And it took her about 2 years because people were busy, but she had a good audience because she had some pictures that she would show. And in this area, they didn't have pictures, they didn't have magazines, they didn't have newspapers, so just to see pictures was exciting. And so the compounds that she had gone to, we'd already established relationships with. So what I did was go and teach the women to read and write their language. I was trained in literacy, but of course before I did that I had to write a primer, so we'd have something to use to learn to read. So I wrote a primer, and then I went around and I would talk to the women. I'd tell them what I wanted to do, and if they were interested, I would say, fine, you need to get your husband's permission. And so they would ask their husband, and most of them said yes, they didn't care, but a few said no. And so once a week I would go, and I told them I would spend 30 minutes with them, and I usually spent about 45 to 50 minutes with them, and work teaching them to read and write their language. But really my main motivation was to be able to share the gospel with them. And after a time they realized, yes, she is coming every day, just like she said she would. She is teaching us to read. And they would start asking me questions. They had heard a lot about Christianity, most of it wrong, and they were curious. So I had opportunities to share the gospel. One of the bigger success stories actually involved the husband of one of the women I was teaching. One day, neither of his two wives were home, and so I said, well, I'll come back another day. I didn't want to be sitting around the compound without any women there. And he said, no, stay, I want to talk to you. And he said, and he told me he had a question. He said, if someone becomes a Christian and then they do something wrong, what happens? And so that opened the door for me to share very clearly with him. And other people have talked to that man. He has now become a Christian. And I just got word last week that he's led his first person to Christ himself. So that was exciting to hear. I miss what I did terribly, yeah. I miss the people I work with, both missionaries and nationals. The African people are so gracious. When I would be at a compound and it was mealtime, I was always served first. If there was one piece of meat in the sauce, I got the piece of meat. Jonta mi dili, a jota jam. Now I'm leaving, you stay well.